2019 was a pivotal year for African women. Women demanded change, broke barriers, and made history while doing it. But what were the obstacles along the way, and will these changes actually hold for the next years to come? Welcome to the conversation. I'm Ayen Bior with my colleagues Hayde Adams FitzPatrick and Auriane Itangishaka. And we're joined once again by our Africa Division colleague, Tatenda Gumbo. Welcome, Tatenda.
Thank you. It's great to be back once again.
Well, 2019 came with personal, professional and political challenges for a number of African women. South African runner Caster Semenya lost her landmark case against the International Association of Athletics Federations. She now has to take medication to reduce her testosterone if she wants to compete internationally. Semenya is refusing to do that, saying she is a woman and wants to compete as one. All this could spell the end of Semenya's elite athletic career. Then Somali-American Illhan Omar made history when she was sworn in as a U.S. Congresswoman at the beginning of 2019. She's been regularly targeted and even threatened on social media. In April, the FBI arrested a man who threatened to assault and murder Omar. But there was also good news. Nigeria's Oluwaseun Ayodeji Osowobi is among Time magazine's 100 most influential people. Uganda's Jessica Nabongo became the first black woman to travel to every country in the world. That's 195 countries, people. And South Africa's Sare Nkusi became the first African woman to climb Mount Everest.
Wow, African women dominated this
That
year.
is a lot.
You know, so obviously a lot has happened this year, and 2019 in particular is special because it's not just the end of a year, it's the beginning of a new decade. Looking back at the gains that African women have made, do you ladies think that these gains will have any lasting impact?
Totally.
I think so, yeah.
I truly believe that the gains made by African women around the world in 2019 will see lasting impact. And in the many trailblazers that I know and that I've seen in 2019, one that comes to my mind right away is Dr. Chiyombore Kwao, the former African Union ambassador. This year, it seems that she has begun a powerful movement galvanizing West Africans and Africans in the diaspora to free themselves from what she calls slavery, economic slavery of the franc CFA currency. And although in November she was let go from her position, that very same month of November, several countries in West Africa actually have taken steps to remove themselves and to remove their currency out of the French economy and putting it into other partners around the world. And this can give them control over the economies. And so I think lasting impact is to be seen.
I think African women make impact every single year. And I think where the shortcoming is on the part of the media and where the spotlight falls often. So I think this year, probably perhaps there was more spotlight on African women. Women are making strides every single day. One woman in particular, as we mentioned earlier, Caster Semenya, for me, was probably one that really caught my attention, and even here on the show, ours for the year, because I think what she did was really important. Caster Semenya shone light on an issue that few people were willing to talk about. She certainly wasn't the first person in the world of athletics that competed with high levels of testosterone, but she was the first one to really stand up and say, no, I am not going to abide by decisions made by people who do not understand and appreciate who I am. She paid the price for it because, look, now there's hints that she's going to leave the world of athletics. She might retire as a runner. She's going to go into soccer. And in a way that kind of sometimes feels, you kind of feel you would hope that she would end on a higher note. But I think sometimes that's the role of trailblazers. They sometimes end up being sort of, the sacrificial lambs. They don't always become the presidents. They don't always become the people that we hope, but we mustn't forget that they blaze the trail and they make it easier for women who follow after us. Nobody is going to forget Caster Semenya in this conversation, thanks to her.
Stops. It's on a high end for sure.
Absolutely, and I think when you look at Caster Semenya, you look at other women, we talked about Illhan Omar, I think that they have been unapologetic in how they present themselves, who they are. And I think, Illhan Omar was the first woman to ever wear a hijab in the United States Congress. I think that's very telling. There are people out there who have fear about what that means, when it comes to the American society when you have a woman who presents herself that way, and how that may be fearful for them. But I think these women have shown that it doesn't matter what scope you are, where you're from, what your religion is, what your sexuality or gender might be, but they're unapologetic, and they're making us
always a backlash against the person who's the first to do it, right?
And I mean, it made us question what we stood for. You know, I think with Caster Semenya, as Africans, we said to ourselves, what does that mean? And what does that mean for us as society in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in South Sudan, in Burundi, wherever we are in the world? What does that mean when we look at an athlete who we're a little bit confused about who she is, who he is, but how does that define who we are as people, as Africans, and how we move about?
Well, if Illhan Omar and Caster Semenya have taught me anything, it is that African women are already empowered. And there's this narrative that the African woman, whatever that means, the African woman needs to be empowered. I don't really know where that comes from. We don't need to be empowered. We just need people to get out of our way so that we can take our rightful place, the places that we have earned to be.
And there's a certain amount of arrogance that goes with wanting to empower someone else. I believe if you are truly an empowered woman, you should be able to recognize it in someone else as well.
And of course, we now know that Kamala Harris has dropped out of the 2020 presidential campaign.
And I think that'll make an impact. We'll have to see what happens, obviously. But I think she was a symbol for, young black women. But also you see that she is of Indian heritage. I think that's also very dynamic in terms of her campaign for 2020.
And I think, like we said earlier, the story doesn't always end the way people hope it does or the way people think it will. Every race does come to an end. It's about trailblazing.
Well, we want to hear from you. Was 2019 a pivotal year for African women? Tell us why or why not. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle is @VOA Our Voices. Or send us a message on WhatsApp. That number is on your screen.
We have to take a short break, but we do have a lot coming up, including a look at how women use the art of protest to shed light about gender-based violence. We'll be right back.
Part of Our Voices is about more than just sitting here and talking about women's issues. It's about listening to them.
And bringing their opinions to the table and making sure their voices are heard.
Because our lived experiences, our stories, and our voices will help shape the next generation.
Welcome back. You're with Our Voices. As this year wraps, we're taking a look back at what a pivotal year it was for African women. And if 2019 was pivotal, protesting may have been the vehicle for change. Unapologetic protests for transformation took place in the streets across the continent and across the world, and women were at the forefront. At the top of those demands was a global call to end violence against women. From Mexico City to Madrid, tens of thousands of people took to the streets on the International Day for the elimination of violence against women. The protest in Sudan was the first of its kind in decades, amid a celebration of the launch of the Unit to Combat Violence Against Women and Children.
Violence against women takes on so many different forms, and in a lot of our communities, it is so normalized that you have women who think that it's okay to be beat by their husbands or even their husbands' mothers. And I actually didn't realize this until this show, but the UN estimates that about 50,000 women die every single year because of intimate partner violence. That is insane to think about. And with all of that taken into account, it's no wonder that the Sudanese women, right after they got rid of their leader, one of the first things that they did was they took to the streets to protest this very issue.
I love that they did that, though, because they recognize that, look, we now have our political freedom, but we need to set our agenda from day one. And they took to the streets and made their own safety and their right to safety top of their agenda. And I wish in South Africa that we had done that in 1994. We have this problem of femicide in my home country. And I think if in 1994 we set the agenda then already, since at the very beginning, since civil society plays such an important role and is so powerful in that country. Now, this is all woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I think what Sudan's doing is so admirable, and I think really other countries can learn from that.
They set a precedent for the years to
right, and
come.
they're saying that, we played an important role in getting us this far, but the fight isn't over. It never is. We have to come out every single day, and we have to constantly be aware of this.
What's empowering and what's really encouraging to hear is when a government actually takes responsibility. We know that in Nigeria, officials there are working to bring more awareness to gender-based violence. Last year, the authorities launched the first nationwide registry for sex offenders. And actually, they did a candlelight procession in the capital, Abuja, for the awareness to prevent violence against women. While, this is welcome, the activists against gender-based violence, they welcome this move by the government of Nigeria, but they also are skeptical because they think that there's poor prosecution in the country.
And I understand the skepticism, but it has to be said, this is actually very critical because this is not only Africa's most populous country, but it is a deeply patriarchal country.
Yeah, but I salute it, though. I salute it because, as you said, it's a patriotic country, but when you look at a government actually stepping up to make this kind of step, it's a bold step in places where sexual harassment in many countries on the continent is normalized.
Right.
But if a government stands up and say, we're actually going to have a sex registry, it's very encouraging.
It absolutely is encouraging, but I think that the point of prosecuting sex offenders or those who perpetrate violence against women, I think that's what I am most concerned about. You see cases where women do protest, so women go out there and they call for prosecution against their alleged perpetrators. And at times you see that we saw it in Zimbabwe where women said that security forces, police, the army, were raping them, were sexually assaulting them, and it kind of fell behind deaf ears. Right. So sometimes you wonder, well, if you have a registry such as this in particular countries, how effective is it? How far up the chain does it go? Right. Who will be on that registry? Because yes, we want every man, but it shouldn't matter that you are a government official and you're not on there, or you are a police officer, an army, a colonel or whatever, and
no one is above the law.
And there the proof is going to be in the pudding, because even though African countries, by and large, we're seeing fewer wars on the continent, newer dispensations, younger democracies, which means we're going to have very progressive laws. Right. And the laws look amazing on paper, but we also know that we have this issue on the continent with enforcement of those laws. And I think that's going to be, but I love it when smaller countries are really leading the way. Younger democracies like Sierra Leone declaring rape a national emergency. Really that process being egged on by the First Lady, which I think is really worth noting. And then of course the DRC has actually shown that you can involve the military in prosecuting members in its own ranks, not just prosecuting them, but punishing them. So I think we are seeing good examples that we can point to, but I think it's still going to be a litmus test over the next few years to see how serious governments are about this.
And I have to point out, the case that happened this year, of course, Haiti in South Africa, where the postal worker raped and killed that university student. And I mean, that was an interesting case because you saw people rally around that and call for his persecution, and he did. He was given a sentence of 3 life terms, and I mean, the court said they were going to prosecute him at the fullest extent, and they did.
And a huge part of that is women taking to the streets over the years, women building this coalition of civil society, government exactly, and really forcing government to sit up and take note, and they have to now.
Absolutely.
And these are conversations that I'm sure that we will continue to have. That's true. Well, coming up, we reintroduce you to trailblazing, history-making, vocal women that we kept our eye on over this past year in our Women to Watch segment. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're with Our Voices. This year, we featured Nigeria's Tope Oshin in our Women in Film episode. Tope is a filmmaker whose work includes MTV Nigeria's Sugar, as well as the movie Up North and New Money, which you can watch on Netflix. Tope, it's so nice to have you again.
Same here. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, good morning to you. You're in LA, and good afternoon to me here in Washington. Tope, this has been quite a busy year for you and for African women in the film industry. What stood out to you the most this year? Did women make any gains, and what were some of the obstacles that women in film encountered?
Well, from my part of the world, where I operate in Nigeria, it was a really good year for women. We got some of the biggest movies made from the country by women. Also talking about productions on television were sort of led by women. So, I mean, for us, by and large, it was a year that we saw a lot of female producers and directors doing the best work from the country that represented the country, internationally as well. And I think that, I mean, in Nigeria, it was indeed the year of the woman. That much I can say.
Absolutely. And in fact, we spoke about the movie Lionheart, which was directed by Nigeria's Genevieve Njai, which was disqualified from the Oscars. And of course, there was a lot of criticism about that. It was disqualified because it is a majority English film. Did you think that the criticism that the Oscars received for barring that movie, do you think that the criticism was deserved?
Personally, my personal views are quite mixed. To start with, I feel like the argument and the uproar should have been about the criteria for entering films to have changed when the name of the category changed from foreign language film to best international film. I feel like our fight then should have been that the clause that had to do with the percentage of local language within the film should have been adjusted to reflect the new title of Best International Film, knowing that there are countries like Nigeria, whose lingua franca is English, and there are also similarly other countries in Africa who were colonized by the French. So, their unifying language is French. And I think that was the majority of the argument on Twitter and on the internet about Lionheart, being that English is the unifying language in Nigeria. We have well over 520 languages, and English is what unites us all. That's how we communicate. You literally can have 5 people from Nigeria in the same room and speaking local languages, we wouldn't understand each other. So for me, though, I feel like the argument to the Oscars, the criticism to the Academy should have been that, the foreign language clause should have been amended. So that it would be more inclusive, so that truly when you have films from other parts of the world, like we had Lionheart, it could have accommodated us more or accommodated us better in a fairer light, seeing that we are now not saying, we're now not talking about films that are not in English, but films from other parts of the world. This is what I feel the criticism should have been. Not that it's marginalization against films from Nigeria or films from Africa or films from women or films from Black people, but just, properly representing what it means to be in the Best International Film category.
Tope, I think that one of the many reasons why you as a filmmaker resonate with so many people is because you are changing the idea of what a director looks like. And thanks to you and others, it's becoming the norm to see women make films. What does that responsibility mean to you? And is it fair to hold you accountable for being a role model?
For me, it's very important that young women and young girls in Nigeria and Africa and in the world in general have models to look up to, have women like me to say, Tope is doing it, so I can do it too. That's sort of what I didn't have starting out as a director when I did 15 years or so ago in Nigeria. I literally had just one model, and that was Amaka Igwe. I eventually made a documentary about her to talk about this, and that was the biggest thing for me. The biggest difficulty actually was that I had no one to look up to except her. And again, I didn't feel like I could look up to her like that because I felt like she was, huge, this huge woman who, most people didn't see as a woman and all of that. And which is one of the reasons why I made my documentary, Amaka's Kin, The Women of Nollywood, which was like an expose on the very few female directors that we had in Nigeria at the time. I made this documentary 4 years ago. For me, it was really important that young girls who wanted to be more than actors, to be directors, to work behind the cameras, could look at me, could look at Kemi Adetiba, could look at Omoni Oboli or, other my female contemporaries and say, it's possible. I can call the shots. I can tell my own stories. I can do that without feeling like nobody's going to listen to me, which is sort of what I felt like in the beginning. I said, I'm just a girl. I'm shy. Who is going to listen to me? Who is going to listen to my small voice and say, I have a story to tell? Are they going to believe that I know what I'm talking about? So this is why it's important for me to be here, to continue to be here, to continue to put my work out there so that it's seen, beyond just saying this film is directed by Tope Oshin, to put it out there and for people to know that this is a woman. She's operating in Nigeria. She's operating in Africa. She's operating in the world. As a woman, I think this is one of the things that I really like about Nigeria is the fact that we female directors, female producers are getting up and doing it for ourselves. We are no longer in that age when we believe that we need the permission of the men or the permission of anybody or the permission of even our audience to tell the stories we want to tell. We simply and basically decide I'm going to tell the story. I want to make a movie. I'm going to take it to the cinemas, or I'm going to, put it on Netflix or whatever. I'm going to make people see my story. And, we are doing it, and we find that the boundaries are just in our minds. The boundaries are where you put them. But if you say to yourself, I'm going to do this and nothing is going to stop me, we do it, and we are doing it, and we're living testimonies of that. And this is a great encouragement for young women and young girls in Nigeria and in Africa to see that we just get up and tell our stories. We just get up and do what we need to do. And, while we're doing that, we're also striving for excellence so that we are not being favored as women to say, okay, this is a film made by a woman, so I'm going to watch it in the cinemas. Nobody does that. This is a good film, I'm going to watch it in the cinemas, and that is what we're working towards, to make excellent films, period. Either made by women or not, we're making films that resonate and that our audience can connect to, and, people can be proud of in general as films from Nigeria.
What you're talking about seems to have been the theme of 2019, not just for women in film, but for also women in business or women in the arts. And here at the table, we have decided that 2019 was a pivotal year for women in film and for women in sports. How would you describe this year?
I think it would be very correct to say that 2019 is the year of the woman. And that's everywhere in the world, because we've had a lot of very important conversations that have come up this year as relates to the woman, concerning gender equality, concerning rape, concerning, name it, just like you said, in film, in sports, in everything, we sort of have seen internationally that women are getting up and speaking up for themselves and refusing to be marginalized and refusing to be victims. Above all, we have so many really cool hashtags on Twitter and on social media now fighting for the woman and ensuring that, we are not in that space where we allow things happen to us, but we are speaking up and saying this will no longer happen to me because I refuse to be a victim. I refuse to be in that space where things are happening to me, but I rather want to start up conversations in the world and, take a place for myself. So it would be right if we said 2019 internationally, as well as in Africa, is the year of the woman and women emancipation across the world.
Tope, thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. Well, here's a look at some of Tope's work.
Kamari has been nothing but a complete gentleman.
I promised your father before he died that
I'll get an education. I know.
Don't be me supposed to bring money for this house. Another man dey here.
Peter, what is your problem? You will not be crying. Government, give me work. Government, give me work. Meanwhile, you are here.
Why don't we start with you telling me why you're here?
How you doing?
So that's just a quick look at some of Tope Oshin's work. And I have to say, she is not just very talented, but she's also one of the nicest women that I've worked with on the show. And of course, we have a long list of women of which we can say the same of.
I mean, I think it's amazing to see that she's in charge of delivering our narratives, be it about African women, African men on the continent, the diaspora. I think it's amazing. It's a testament to her story.
A nice woman who is intelligent and successful.
Absolutely. It's a testament to that we can go on Netflix and see what she's done and she's telling our stories as they are and the truthfulness of them. And I've been watching a young woman. I hope to keep watching her into the next year. Her name is Natasha Mwansa, and she's 18 years old. And she spoke at a conference that featured about 8,000 people in the crowd, including President Uhuru Kenyatta and the Canadian President Justin Trudeau. And she received a standing ovation. And,
I remember watching that, and I also stood up in my living room. I was so excited.
I mean, it was amazing. Her passion, her drive, you can kind of see it as she's standing there. And there's a sense of innocence about her that kind of says, I want to see, where I come from in the world change. And I think I look forward to just seeing what she does.
That's great. Well, for me in 2019, definitely, I was watching for the past several months the infamous Dr. Chiyombori Kwao. I mean, hands down.
That is a complete surprise to us.
It's my area. I mean, I watch politics a lot, but I think she's been very impressive in the things that she's been saying about the economic freedom of the continent. And so I'll be watching her definitely even in the next year to come.
And I know you're very passionate about those issues. I remember, I don't know if you guys remember, I interviewed Mutoni Masinde, a woman who's also known as Africa's weather maven.
Yes.
We had her here in Washington, and she just completely impressed me. She came up with something called a little drought predictor, and it's a kind of early warning system that fuses traditional wisdom from farmers in Africa and science. And it then helps farmers cope with the changes of climate change. And what she's done, her own mother was a small-scale farmer in her native Kenya. She's taken this technology, fused it with everything she learned from her mother, and then the things she learned from the universities of Europe and South Africa. She's taken both those things and come up with this nifty little gadget. And this gadget helps her help farmers like her mother predict, know when to plant, know what to plant and when to plant it. And these are all farmers who are just like her mother. Yeah. So I really, really love that about her. She is so down to earth. And she's just so intelligent. And I feel so at ease knowing that there are women like her on the continent and that we can invest in women like that because they're going to take us forward. And watch this woman. This is not even the start for her. The weather maven. That's really a woman that I'm watching, and I really wish her the best. And we will now leave you with one of our favorite quotes from this year, from one of our favorite women of all time, another Kenyan, Wangari Maathai, the first African woman to win the Nobel Prize. She used her voice to say, African women in general need to know that it is okay for them to be the way they are, to see the way they are as a strength, and to be liberated from fear and from silence.
Isn't that a great quote? I love that.
It's so simple but so powerful.
And it gets me every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all from us today. You can catch up on previous episodes of Our Voices on voanews.com. And as always, thanks for watching. Good day.